it's almost like confidence like has to take the shape of like I do what I need to do and I ignore the noise, right? I mean, so basically like at some point was like, like but why is this happening? Why do I have to do more, right? I mean, basically like and at some point it's like, look, this is what it is, right? I mean, I'm just like, like I think like my position is like it is counterproductive to like, like always bring back up like the but you didn't give me a promotion because I'm a woman, or you need to reconsider or whatever. It's just like I just need to prove that I do the job, I get things done, and I move on, right?
Welcome to Women in Quantum.
Welcome back to Women in Quantum, the podcast where we spotlight the brilliant, bold, and boundary-breaking women shaping the future of quantum science, technology, and policy. Each episode, we go beyond titles and resumes to explore the real journeys, real challenges, and what is the real impact these women have. From researchers and founders to policymakers and pioneers, these are the women driving one of the most important revolutions of our time. If you're curious about quantum, inspired by leadership, or passionate about inclusion in tech, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today, we're speaking with Jennifer Pretki. Now, she has a lot of titles behind her. She's an influencer, she's a speaker, she's a policymaker, she bridges AI and quantum. She might even have a stealth startup to tell us about, maybe or maybe not, or maybe in a future interview, but she is really involved in tech leadership. Jennifer, I am so excited to speak with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Like I love the mission you're on, so I'm really glad to be part of it.
Awesome. I love that. I love that. Okay. So let's start at the very beginning. Okay. Let's start with where you grew up and what your main what most excited you in school in the very beginning, back
Yeah.
in grammar school.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think it's a great mystery where I'm from. You know immediately from my accent that I'm French, right? I mean, I've been desperately trying to hide it, but unfortunately, kind of
Never,
difficult.
never. No, don't. It's beautiful. It's beautiful accent.
Thank you, I appreciate that. No, so I mean, interesting story. You're asking like basically like what I was interested about. One of my earliest memories was when I was 3 years old. I was asked to draw what like I wanted to be when I grew up, right? And I drew like an astronomer with like a little telescope, right? I mean, like when most kids like have no idea like what like a telescope is even is, right? And yeah, it's just stuck with me, right? I mean, basically like a understanding of the universe, right? I mean, I was very curious about everything related to physics. When I grew up, like maybe around like 8 years old, I started hearing about quantum physics. I became like I fell in love. I was like, this is so weird, and like basically like all of the like the idea of like you have to discover things you cannot see, right? And so that became like my dream and my focus, right? I mean, and so yeah, I mean, eventually like I became a quantum physicist, a particle physicist, and basically like the masters that I did, right? I mean, my big PhD was in particle physics, but my masters was like sort of a bridge like between like astrophysics and nuclear and particle physics. So, yeah.
So has all of your education happened in France, or did you go to any other countries along the way to continue with your education?
So particle physics is an interesting field, right? I mean, because like, and in particular, if you do experimental particle physics, right? Why? Because you need to be associated with a particle like a detector or experiment, right? So you don't have many of those, right? I mean, you have like just a handful of like particle accelerators in the world, right? The main one that everybody thinks about like nowadays is LHC in Europe, right? I mean, so back in the days when I started my PhDs, LHC was just being finished, so there was not yet like data collection processes. So I picked an experiment which was based at SLAC, so Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, which happened to specialize basically like on the concept known as CP violation, which is like asymmetry between matter and antimatter. And that requires like, like capturing very small signals, and like because like you're really observe like very rare like cases of asymmetry like between both, right? And so that experiment obviously was in the US, right? So when you are working on an experiment like this, you're part of the collaboration that holds the same name as the experiment. My experiment was the Babar experiment, right? And so I had to travel all the time back and forth between Stanford and Paris, right? I mean, so technically my PhD, my degree is from Sorbonne University, but basically I spent a lot of times in the US. I was really exposed to like both like the US scientific community and the French scientific community.
Did you notice any cultural differences between the US and France in terms of how many women you saw around you pursuing quantum?
Yeah, no, so it's an excellent question. So I often have the same question for myself. So let me explain why, right? I mean, so France is an interesting country for basically like that very question, because like historically speaking and culturally speaking, like like when like I grew up like in the 80s, 90s, right? I mean, basically there was like no, like I would almost say like basically like there was an expectation of women working, right? I mean, and basically like having degrees, etc. So I never felt like basically like like you're not supposed to like do science or tech topic because you're a woman or whatever, right? Or at least I didn't feel it, right? And that continued like even after like university and so forth and so on, right? Then when I started my PhD, right? I mean, because I needed to start traveling, like basically like there's like one variable, which is like I started being exposed to like the culture of a different country, right? And yeah, I mean, so basically like so I went from the point where you had a majority of men in school, right? I mean, basically like for my master's, but like I never felt like like you don't belong or anything like this, right? And then when I started my PhD, I was like, wait, it's like, like, so, like it's not necessarily super direct, right? I mean, I was like, examples would be like, because it's like more like, like men first, or like primary men, like in the space, right? They didn't necessarily reject you from like conversations or whatever, but they would do what boys do and like basically like, go out together, and then like you wouldn't go there because you're a woman, right? I mean, so you don't necessarily have the same interest, and then they would talk about like interesting technical topics. So I had to do more like like basically catch up on like the news, what's going on in the lab, like who's publishing something interesting. Like those conversations would happen like also outside of work, and the activities outside of work, like being a girl or being a woman, you're not necessarily conveyed like naturally, right? But I didn't necessarily feel like like basically like a direct like criticism, like you don't know what you're talking about, but I started feeling like basically this drift, right? And because like it's harder to be part of the community because like people are passionate about what they do, so they keep talking about this outside the lab, outside the university, and so forth and so on. And so like eventually like basically like the activities are like separate, right? I mean, basically like what a 20-25 year like a girl would do like after getting out of the lab is not necessarily what the guys would do, right? I mean, so anyways, right? So I wouldn't say like it's necessarily like like conscious, right? I mean, basically like our a direct attack of like basically we don't want you to be part of this, but like you have to fight to keep in touch, or basically like keep up to date with the latest news, right? And so that's one thing that I realized, right? And this started happening when I was doing my PhD, which coincidentally is the time when I started being exposed to like the US culture as well, right? I mean, so I cannot say for sure if it's more like like the way a PhD functions, where it's less about like like in person like lectures and so forth and so on, and about like starting to work and like basically like in a more professional setting, right?
So what challenges, because you mentioned this a little bit, but I want to dig a little deeper. What
Mm.
challenges did you face early in your career that you didn't necessarily expect?
What challenges I didn't necessarily expect, right? I mean, so I mean, what we just said in a way is like when I jumped, so maybe it's worth like going a little bit deeper like on my profile, right? I mean, so we talked about like my first like professional like experience job was my PhD, right? I mean, basically like apart from like, you know, like summer gigs or whatever, right? So I experienced like academia, right? I mean, as being my first job, right? Then I happened to graduate just at the very beginning of the recession, right? I mean, so basically I studied my postdoc. I'm also exposed to like academia, but then like because like especially for particle physics, you are dealing with very expensive experiments. There are like, you know, like obviously there were like significant numbers of experiments that were not being funded anymore. So there was like at this time you had like this sort of like drift or like a migration of like particle physicists into the industry, right? And one of the things that was like relatively popular was like either data science or like quant, right? I mean, so basically quantitative finance. So I did quantitative finance first, and then I jumped into data science because I didn't like didn't find like quantitative finance like to be fulfilling enough, right? And so I experienced a little bit like, you know, like what happens in industry in different fields, right? I mean, and whatnot, right? And so in academia, because I was like in this environment like in France where, you know, like you don't feel the pressure of like women are not expected to like you know, like study something technical, right? I started feeling this more, you know, like in the early stages of my career, and it's like I wasn't prepared for this, right? Because like if I had been like in an environment where, you know, like from the beginning it's like, hey, you're a girl, you're not supposed to do a PhD, right? I mean, and so forth and so on, I don't think would have shocked me, right? I mean, and so it was almost like, whoa, like, you know, like what, why, right? I mean, because like I grew up in a family where there was an expectation for women to you know, like basically like study, right? I mean, and from a school perspective, like basically there was never any pushback, right? I mean, so but so then I grew like, you know, like throughout my career. I felt like there was more and more pressure, not necessarily in entering like the job market, but in keeping steady, right? I mean, so that a lot of like professional like women like who have like you know, like high positions like CEOs and so forth and so on will tell you the same things. Like it's harder to climb the ladder, right? I mean, because like you clearly like have to prove yourself more, and you have to, you know, like basically like to get a promotion, right? I mean, basically like because there is an expectation that, you know, like women don't need promotion as much as men do, right? I mean, so it's more like that sort of thing like really shocked me later on.
So let me ask you, has confidence become easier for you as you've risen in influence, or has it simply changed shape for you?
It's almost like confidence like has to take the shape of like I do what I need to do and I ignore the noise, right? I mean, so basically like at some point was like, you know, like but why is this happening? Why do I have to do more, right? I mean, basically like and at some point it's like, look, this is what it is, right? I mean, I'm just like, you know, like I think like my position is like it is counterproductive to like, you know, like always bring back up like the but you didn't give me a promotion because I'm a woman, or you need to reconsider or whatever. It's just like I just need to prove that I do the job, I get things done, and I move on, right? Thankfully, like you have still people who like think this way, right? I mean, so basically like, so you have to be lucky like once in a while that basically like you do have a manager who gets it this way, right? And you know, like basically like hoping that the fact that you break like the glass ceiling like helps the next woman break the glass ceiling faster, right?
When facing doubt internally, what's your process for deciding whether to speak up or to step back?
Hmm. That's a good question, right? I mean, so basically it's like, I mean, my tendency would be like, you know, like if there is, I mean, I would say like most of the time it's actually both, right? I mean, because like except it's like ordering matters. So usually my technique is like, okay, so you doubt me, or you know, like for some reason like you don't think like, you know, like a woman would be capable of doing this. I don't know yet if it's completely like because of gender or something else, right? Let me do it, execute, get it done, and then later like go back and say like, see, like you know, like there seemed to have been an hesitation that this could be done so quickly, or I could handle the project is taken care of, right? So like it's more like basically like take note, right? I mean, basically like I like want to emphasize that basically like see there was no need to doubt like my ability to execute, right? Instead of like starting first and say like, but you have to give me like give me a chance to prove this or whatever. The problem with this approach is like a problem that many women actually do know, right? I mean, which is like you often operate beyond your pay grade, right? I mean, and basically like the problem because of this is like, okay, so she did this without the promotion or without the boost in compensation. Why should I give her the promotion, right? I mean, because she's already operating at the N+1 level, right? So this is when you need to speak up, right? I mean, it's like, hey, I executed this. I know that this is like beyond my pay grade. I did it anyways. I want you to do something about this now.
Okay. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. What's one piece of advice you'd give your younger self at the start of your quantum journey?
So it's like it's interesting. Like that's a question I get a lot. Is like what advice would you give yourself? My opinion is like, look, things worked out pretty well, like the way they are. So it's like, I mean, I'm one of those people like like Jensen Huang, right? I mean, from NVIDIA, right? It's like you want to go through hardship and learn things the hard way to grow, right? So I mean, I don't
Doesn't
know if
always
I
all
would
have to
want
be
to.
hard, right?
No,
Doesn't
that's
always have to be, right?
but it's like like basically like I think like like I made like a lot of the right decisions, right? I mean, if I had to like tell myself anything, is like like trust the process. It's sometimes hard. It's okay for things to be hard, right? I mean, so that like like not but like anyways, I don't think I would want to give away any of the secrets because like like you better learning those yourself. And truthfully, I also don't like this like like everybody's journey is different, everybody's different, circumstances are different. Like what worked for me back then might not work for people today, right? I mean, so basically like, I think that the most important thing is like trust yourself, resilience, right? I mean, basically like be wise, keep calm, right? I mean, basically like don't like don't get mad too early because like thing like obviously like it is hard for a woman to make a path for herself. So yeah, I mean it's probably the most important qualities.
What practical steps could students take now to enter the quantum field?
No, so like basically, I think it's a sort of a loaded question, right? Because like when you say enter the quantum field or the quantum computing field, right? We're at this phase where uh people think like basically, oh, you need a PhD in quantum physics or like basically you need to be a hardware person or whatever. Quantum is about to have this revolution, right? I mean, we're basically like like there's gonna be more and more application. It's gonna start like replacing some of the like or complementing some of the classical techniques and so forth and so on. And just like in software, it's not just about the engineers, right? I mean, it's not just about building the thing, but it's also about like teaching people like how to use quantum computers. So you're gonna need like customer success people, you're going to need marketing for quantum computers and so forth and so on, right? So like my advice is not going to be like the advice is like study like on understand quantum or whatever. It's like basically like look, uh do what you do best. If what you do best is like interacting with customers, if it's like building things, if it's like implementing software, or if it's like marketing or whatever, go for it. But if you're interested in going in quantum, read about quantum, read about the limitations about quantum, talk to people who work on quantum, right? I mean, what are the capabilities of quantum today, right? And start incorporating this in like what you do best, because at some point we're gonna need people who can like basically like explain to new customers how they're gonna deploy their new algorithms on the quantum computer, right? I mean, so it's like it's not the leap of faith is not that large, right? I mean, you don't need to drop out of school and go study like quantum physics in order to jump in the field, right? And because there's gonna be like a massive pool of like talent of all sorts that can basically like like properly like seamlessly like integrate quantum into like like the infrastructure we use today in science and in technology.
Okay. Was there a turning point when you realized your career might be more entrepreneurial than academic?
Well, so like I actually like basically like when I was like like in academia, I thought like this is what I wanted to be, right? And I still like basically like like I wanted to discover the universe, and it was kind of like heartbreaking for me like jumping in industry, right? When I became a data scientist, I realized immediately, like, like basically, like, it's like, wait, it's like many like similar things that still need, like, it's just like a little bit more practical. And I think people do not realize, or I did not realize as the younger version of myself, that I do have most of what's needed to be successful in industry. And like basically like I very quickly got back to like basically like the same like little joys of like like experimentation, because you also experiment when you're a researcher in industry, right? I mean, it's just like it's different, right? I mean, so it's like I would tell people who want to do the leap, right? I mean, it's like really like uh get an idea of your strength. Like, what is it that you do good, like you do really well, like in academia? Is it like more writing papers? Is it more like experimentation, managing people? You also have to mentor like younger students and so forth and so on, right? And then start thinking of like, how does this apply like in a different role, right? I mean, and so yeah, I mean, basically like, so if you see that this is going to apply a lot to like a specific role you're planning to take on, it's like sell yourself on this, right? I mean, basically like, so like basically like, so my personal story, I can tell you a little bit about that, right? I mean, it's like when I was so like, again, like when you're part of a collaboration, of course you do research with like basically the data that was collected on this accelerator. You're trying to discover new particles, measure like specific properties from those particles, right? But you also have to contribute to like the higher level, like like well functioning of the experiment, right? And so one of my like, so I had like basically like some responsibilities like with the hardware. I was working on the DIRC, which is like the cryogenic system that basically like needs to keep like the entire like you need to keep like this part of the detector like cool, so that you can like measure like chunk of light, which only happens at very low temperatures, right? I mean, anyways, but I was doing something that was like more interesting, which was like data quality, right? I mean, because like you collect data, then you have to do some level of like preparation for this data, so that yourself and other researchers can do research on it, right? And so I started like having like pretty good ideas about like like how to collect the data in the first place, so that you have to do less cleaning, right? I mean, how do you actually like reduce like the noise ratio, right? I mean, in the entire data set and so on and so on, right? And so like being like, eventually when I jumped in industry, became a data scientist, it's like, the data here is low quality. What can we do to clean this? What infrastructure do you, and this was very needed, right? I mean, so basically, so like I transferred like my expertise, like preparing data for research, to preparing data for data scientists, and then basically like this is how my career grew into like becoming like the data person in pretty much every company I worked for, right? I mean, and basically because I could understand like every single aspect of like data collection, data cleaning, data storage, like like basically like latency issues and so forth and so on, right? I mean, so there's always gonna be like things that you do in the context of your research and your PhD or your master's that basically like is very transferable to industry.
What do you think most people misunderstand? Excuse me. What do you think most people misunderstand about the relationship between data quality and AI performance?
Oh, so that's like the right question for me, because like my my entire career has been, so people like like what scaling laws in AI actually are, right? I mean, so basically like, the belief is like the more data, the better a model gets, right? I mean, obviously at some point there's a problem of like return on investment, because you saturate like basically like, the knowledge of the model, right? And basically so my whole thing has always been like data and information are different concepts. So you can have like very like information dense or information rich data, or you can have data that contains no information at all, right? I mean, if it's noise or whatever, and basically like, so like basically like this perception that like just put as much data as possible and your model has to get better, I think is like reaching like basically the point where people like do realize that this is not the case, right? I mean, basically people see that we're reaching the limits of like scaling laws for LLMs, but it was quite a journey to like promote this idea, right? I mean, so there was a period where in yeah, like the 2019 period, like basically people started talking about like data-centric AI, which was like basically you need to care for your data and improve the quality of your data, the shape of your data in order to like actually like basically like improve your model. So like the idea of like garbage in, garbage out.
So how do you see data strategy evolving as quantum computing becomes more practical for real world applications?
Yeah. No, so that's like there are many different like facets to that question, right? So actually, so you do realize that basically the current models are very data greedy and data heavy. We haven't like basically the data management for quantum is really difficult because of quantum physics, right? I mean, so basically you cannot hold like basically a qubit, right? I mean, basically like in a state is like a stable state for very long, right? I mean, so storage doesn't really exist, right? So either, and so this is the most likely path is like you're actually going to have a hybrid approach where you're going to use like classical like technologies and computers to basically like store the data and basically like think about like a like loading as like a like into a quantum process or quantum system, right? So that's like the most like realistic part, right? If like I think there has to be like interesting ways of thinking about data loading that actually leverage like the properties of quantum, right? I don't think there's enough research in that just yet. There are very few papers on the topic, right? But yeah, I mean, basically, like I think like talking about the properties of quantum in general is like the way quantum computers work, you can hold like many different variations, experiments at the same time. So I think like the benefit of quantum, like for AI, is gonna come from like a running multiple hypotheses or like automatically parallelize, right? I mean, basically like a like I think there's more research to happen on like a real-time like data generation and basically like like using like a data generator at the onset instead of thinking of like a pre like either generating data or storing data, right? So that's a big topic, right? I mean, so yeah.
So so you're talking right now about the intersection of AI and quantum. So
Yeah.
is there something that excites you the most about that convergence?
No, I mean, so look, like actually, like, something like this is an interesting topic, right? I mean, because like I think that so most people, even people in quantum, do not realize something very important, which is like the inspiration for quantum computers came from Richard Feynman, right?
Mhm.
And so why did it come? It come because like he felt that using classical computers to model and study quantum processes was impossible, right? I mean, because like you're like not operating in the right substrate, right? And so basically, like, so he said, like, like I predict at some point there's gonna need to be quantum computers to study quantum physics and quantum decays of particles and so forth and so on, right? So this is the genesis of quantum, right? So quantum computers were imagined in the first place to work with quantum processes and study quantum processes, right? So where is it more likely to be useful next? In places where you are studying quantum processes, obviously, right? I mean, so basically, like a quantum chemistry, for example, being one of them, right? And like notice what I didn't mention, LLMs and AI and so forth and so on, right? I mean, because like you're not like really like like you're not yet operating with like at a quantum level, right? So basically, like, so because of this, it's not that quantum computers cannot be used, but like there's gonna have to be like some sort of like like a integration process or like translation process so that like quantum computers can operate with like classical physics, if I can call like LLM a classical like algorithm or a classical physics problem, right? I mean, anyways, right? Where it gets interesting, right? I mean, and so like mentioned that basically like like I started I'm working on a stealth mode startup, right? I mean, so I'm not gonna talk too much about what I do, but I believe that, and like what I work on overlaps a little bit with this idea, right? I believe, and there's more and more research that proves that the human brain is quantum, right? I mean, that basically like the way that you form a hypothesis and the way you reason or whatever is like holding like multiple like parallel states, right? I mean, and the different options which eventually collapse, right? I mean, so basically can and so there are like we're not there yet. I don't think there's like one single theory that really like explain this like the right way, but like there's like a Roger Penrose, for example, who talks a lot about this, right? And basically, so if intelligence and the brain is quantum, then artificial intelligence should be quantum. And then it could, if it's modeled as a quantum process, then guess what? You can run and train that model on a quantum computer, right? So I mean, I think eventually this is gonna go there, right? I mean, and basically, like, so and you know, like it's not like I'm not making any crazy claim because like intrinsically in an LLM you have a lot of like Bayesian processes, and Bayesian processes are the classical representation of like like a superimposition of waves, right? I mean, in a way, right? I mean, so it's like basically like the way we're modeling things that is not quite there yet, right? But basically, like once we have quantum computers, I think people are gonna be more daring and like represent like intelligence as a Hamiltonian instead, right?
So let's talk a little bit about leadership. How would you describe your leadership style, especially when guiding technical teams?
So I'm described as being very hands off, basically. Like so, I trust in like hiring the best team you can and grow the person, inspire the person, and let them do what they do best, right? My role as a leader is like to make sure there's cohesion and everybody goes in the same direction, right? I mean, so it's a lot about like like aligning everybody. I do not believe in micromanagement. Fun fact, since we're talking about like how difficult it is to be like a woman in a leader or whatever, I once had a manager who told me I had to improve my micromanagement skills. And so, like to my knowledge, like micromanagement is not a skill.
No, no, not particularly. No, that's when you don't know. That's when you don't really know what you're doing. So you have to make sure you're on top of what everybody else is doing just to make yourself feel good.
Yeah.
So I don't know a lot of women who are micromanagers, to be honest with you. So I think the way you're going with it is completely correct, right?
Yeah.
Your gut instinct is right on that one.
Yeah. No, and
So
for me, it's always like like making sure that people stay in love with their projects and like anyways, right? I mean, so it's a lot about like like I love to inspire the teams I work for, right? And then delegate and let them run with it, right? I mean, and make sure it doesn't derail, obviously, right? Yeah.
so how do you balance long-term vision with the immediate pressures of execution?
That's the problem everybody has, right? I mean, so anyways, right? I mean, so it's like, I mean, I don't think there is a universal answer to this, right? I mean, so basically like it also depends on like the immediate pressure and the short term, right? I mean, basically sometimes and some weeks you're gonna have to focus more on short term, right? I mean, I tend to believe in like, like taking a bit more time than necessary and do things right? I mean, so that you don't have to pay off that debt like later, right? I mean, but yeah, I mean, anyways, right? I mean, it's I mean, there are techniques I've used, like for example, like you sort of like balance your team where like something that works relatively well for like research that is going to go to production relatively soon. So you have like you split the research team into groups, and you have like you are the research team. Like this week, you're working on like the idea you want, but by the end of this cycle, I want this idea to have some legs, and then you're going to graduate this project to basically like a production cycle, and then you swap, right? I mean, so basically, like, so everybody gets to like work on like a shorter, like, less constrained kind of environment, and then work on like like a productionalization, thinking about like how you're going to measure the success of your experiment, right? I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think what's important is like you give the opportunity to people to find their own balance, so that nobody feels like, hey, I'm always the one who gets to like or that has to do like the shipping to prod, right? I mean, or and the other person gets to do like all of the ideation and the cool stuff. So
Could you share a decision you made that was difficult at the time but ended up paying off?
I mean, for what? Like for like prioritization in particular, or yeah. No, I mean, like It's like an example, like for example, like leading data at DeepMind, right? I mean, so basically, like the first priority was always Gemini, right? I mean, and basically, like we knew like internally that, you know, like at the time we're not supposed to talk about this, but that VO was going to come out, right? I mean, so and you know, like very early, like parts of leadership is like you almost like the entire organization deprioritized what was internally like the future VO, right? I mean, basically like for Gemini, and that team, like the VO team was like, you know, like, but nobody's like helping us like prepare data, deal with like, you know, like you know, like governance issues, etc., etc. And so you had the option of just like focusing on Gemini or doing things for Gemini as a platform so that it does extrapolate relatively naturally to multi-model data, right? And that meant slowing down a little bit. And so obviously, like, I don't think it's a secret to anybody, but like there's a lot of pressure, right? And there was a lot of pressure to like deliver Gemini as soon as possible, right? And yes, I had to push back and basically say like, yeah, no, I'm gonna take another couple of days, couple of weeks, right? And basically like, to do this in a way that is going to extrapolate and be reusable across multiple teams, right? And so obviously this paid off when, you know, like VO became like the product that, you know, like Google was proud about.
So, what traits do you look for when building a team, especially in high growth tech environments?
No, ability to learn, ability to adapt, resilience, right? I mean, so basically, it's like, I mean, you would be very surprised that basically, like, I hired people who had like practically none of the like job requirements, right? Who could just like, you could tell like from the interview that, you know, like they are generating knowledge as we speak, they're learning on the fly, they're thinking really hard or whatever. So yeah, I mean, and like for me, like it's less about the experience, it's more about like, you know, like ability to like think fast and not give up quickly, right? And yeah, I mean, usually like yeah, I don't have like a good example of like I made a decision based on those criteria and it didn't pay off.
So, what advice would you give young women or anyone who feel like an outsider in deep tech?
Well, I mean, depends like where they are at, right? I mean, if it's like you're already studying, but you feel you're not part of the group that you need to be, you know, like basically like I would say, you know, like basically like you know, like I was the shy type that wouldn't easily like meddle with like other, especially what I said earlier is like the boys had their own activity, so it's even harder as a woman to like, you know, like come in the middle or whatever. So I would say like go outside of your comfort zone, engage in conversations, even if it doesn't feel like this is what you would normally do. Read, go to like meetups, like basically like all sorts of events or whatever, because you're gonna meet people who have like a similar like interest, might have similar issues and so forth and so on, right? Yeah, I mean, for people who are not at all in tech, right? I mean, it's like, you know, like we live in an age where like it's relatively easy to get started, like on Coursera, like other like you know, like short-term training and so forth and so on. So I don't think it's a full replacement, partially because when you learn a topic, you want to learn with other people in order to be able to like bounce ideas, ask questions, but it will give you the confidence you need to basically engage with people who do have knowledge in those different spaces, right? But again, like basically, if you're talking about quantum in particular, it's like basically, I think we're entering this phase where there is a critical need for people who understand quantum. Like one of the things that scares me is like if quantum is gonna be like one of like the ways of like deploying AI and training AI, you need people who have like an overlap of knowledge between both, right? It's so hard, like you don't have that many like quantum software experts, for example. Imagine looking for somebody who's like an AI researcher and basically like a person who understands like quantum computing, computer software, and knows how to implement things in Qiskit, right? I mean, this is like a really small number of people, okay? So yeah, I mean, basically like you know, like I think it's really important to encourage people who are not yet doing things in quantum to basically like, educate themselves. The people who are in AI today and, you know, like are thinking about like, how do I differentiate myself? Like, how do I make myself shine compared to the others? Learn like, you know, like basically quantum, like not necessarily quantum hardware. I think there's going to be a huge need for like quantum software developers, right? And yeah, and basically like this is a pretty natural way that I think we're gonna need a lot of people in this intersection very soon.
So how do you think we could build more inclusive environments for women and diverse thinkers in STEM?
No, I mean, so like it's like I think like like the obvious answer that people would give you here is like like we need women in tech like events and so forth and so on. The problem with this is like you have two caveats, right? I mean, so it's like number one, men are not gonna show up at like in a woman for. So I've seen events where basically you have like 50 women and one sponsor men over there or whatever. It's just like like it doesn't really like engage the conversation, right? I mean, so
Right.
I don't think this is the right way. In fact, I would say the right way is like for women to go to like everybody events, right? I mean, and show you're here and show know what you're talking about and talk there, right? I mean, basically like like for me like it's often more beneficial to basically go to like like a conference setting is like give me the keynote. The keynote is gonna be a woman, right? I mean, and basically like you're gonna be able to show that like I have interesting opinions, right? Women have interesting opinions, right? Yeah, and the second caveat is like, for me, the weakness on the market now is not women penetrating the space; it's women raising in this space, right? And so one of the like basically like we need a way that basically like like women feel comfortable raising the ranks instead of like penetrating, and that's probably gonna happen more through mentorship of like how did you make it here, like one-on-one conversations, right? We need something that encourages women to push for the promotion, the better project, like send me to a conference, right? I mean, and so forth and so on, right? I mean, I mean, yeah, I mean, the best way I know how to do this is like basically like empowering women on my teams, like agreeing to like mentoring younger women, right? I mean, and so forth and so on, right? I mean, but like just talking to women in a women-only setting, I don't think like gets you where you need to be.
So you look, you sound strong, you're resilient. Are there any specific experiences that strengthened your resilience or defined your approach to difficult situations or challenges?
Yeah. No, I mean, so like one thing we didn't talk about, right? I mean, it's like basically, and I think like sort of answers your question is so I'm a woman, but I'm a mother, right? And so I have 4 children, and my husband is a stay-at-home dad, right? So
Mhm.
I am in an interesting situation. I know you mentioned like you're also in this situation, but I am in an interesting situation where technically we swapped roles, right? And because like normally an employer assumes that like I think we're at the time where employers believe women can work, right? I mean, so I don't think we need to prove that, right? But people assume that she's gonna have to pick up the kids, she's gonna have to step out if somebody's sick, she's gonna have to leave early, right? I mean, so she might get pregnant and so forth and so on, right? In my situation, it was like basically like like my husband picks up the kids, I can travel, I can come home late, right? I mean, I can leave early, right? I mean, and you can assume I can operate as a man, right? I mean, the typical like CEO like kind of persona, right? But
Mhm.
there's still this like underlying like yeah, but she's a woman, right? And that's one thing like I really always pushed back against, right? Which is basically like I had a situation like a job I got at some point. They asked me for my salary expectations. And I gave them my salary expectation. They're like, oh, you don't need that much. It's like, why are you talking about need, right? I mean, it's like basically this is what I believe I'm worth on the market right now, right?
Right,
And
right.
one thing I realized later is like there's often this assumption that basically like your income is the complementary income. So it's almost like pocket change, right? I mean, it's like
Right.
because your husband is gonna pay for the house, for the mortgage, for the car, for like the utilities and so forth and so on. You like your salary is like like for like like your leisure and so forth and so on, right? It's like no, my salary is what is going to send my kids to college, right? My salary is what pays the home, right? I mean, because we don't have another income, right? And this is like basically like so, and like this is something that I felt like very distraught about. But then I realized like, look, yes, I am the only income. If I'm not strong enough and if I don't push back, maybe my kids don't go to college, right? I mean, so basically I'm gonna have to hold the line here.
That's really exciting. So let me ask you, if people want to find out more information about what you're doing, and how just to be more involved, where would you suggest that we send them?
No, so look, like I'm sort of like I'm working on my new startup. We're starting stealth. I will come out of stealth sooner or later. So like basically, like, people are gonna be able to see what we're working on. One of my like like favorite like other activities is basically like, as you said, like bridging AI and quantum. So basically, I have my own like practice where I give talks. I like regularly like do podcasts on these sort of topics and so forth and so on. Like I consult with people on like how are you gonna adopt like quantum in an AI in the age of AI and so forth and so on, right? I typically answer on LinkedIn, so yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way to like reach out to me, like if you have questions, right? I have like basically like, so my practice is called Quantum of Data, so you can reach out like through Quantum of Data as well. So
That's fantastic. Look, I really, really enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to having another conversation. I think it's so important to meet women like you and just to show, what we're capable of, and that we don't have to necessarily, like you said, we have support at home where we still get to be brilliant on our own terms.
yeah,
And I think that you demonstrate that in spades. It was a thrill to talk to you today.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. Like yeah, I really
Thank you.
enjoyed this conversation as well.
Excellent. So I'm going to let our music take us out.